so that later on these those who have missed will have the opportunity to tap in the information we're going to share today. Just before I share my slide, for record purpose, this is our module for population and health. In an earlier discussion, I was trying to understand the type of students I will be tutoring on this particular module, and I've been told that it's a combination of those who are doing population studies and reproductive health, also those who are doing public health and other modules or courses. It is good that you attend the background of demography, because it is one interesting field that you may need to apply in your practical workspace. Before I start with what we're going to present today, let us peruse through and have a recap of what we went through yesterday. Just a quick recap for about 5 minutes. Then I will be able to make a presentation, and hopefully we can have a 1 hour presentation. Now that it is 7:23, possibly by about 8:23 there is when we can end the lecture. Let me just share my screen. Hey, okay, there it has come. Let me just share uh, this. Can you be able to see that screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So this is just a recap of what we had yesterday, and I want us to focus on the definition of demography. And in these two slides, you will realize that I have summarized each and everything that we discussed yesterday. So it is very critical in this discussion we're having today that you pay attention to, one, the definitions, or the particular definition that I have put up there. And the next line is roughly explaining deeper what the definitions are, but also in its entirety, it is giving you the biggest or the broader picture of what demography is. So, demography, as we said yesterday, is the scientific study of the human population, including its size, distribution, composition, and the factors that determine changes in its size, distribution, and composition. Now, from this definition, we can say that demography focuses on five aspects of the human population, one being the size of the population, two is the distribution of the population, three is the composition of the population, four is the population dynamics, and five is the socioeconomic determinants and consequences of the population. If you realize from our discussion yesterday, we were able to look at all these aspects, and down here I want to define for you a recap of the definitions of these five major aspects of demography. Population size. We're simply talking about the number of persons in a given area at a given time. On our population distribution, we're looking at the way the population is dispersed in a geographical space at a given time. And the population composition is referring to the number of persons in sex, age, and other demographic categories. All demographers would agree that age, sex, race, year of birth, and place of birth are demographic characteristics. And if you go deeper, you realize that these are characteristics that do not change. So when an individual is born, you are either born a black, or you're born a white, or you're born of an Asian race. You cannot change your race. When you're born, your year of birth or your date of birth, then you cannot have a shift in your age. Likewise, your sex. You either be sex here. We're talking about the biological features of being a man or a woman, and here you'll either be a female or you'll be a male. And we're looking at place of birth. Wherever you were born, you cannot change. So these are some of the demographic characteristics that form the population composition that we want to that we looked at yesterday. And if you just peruse through our slides of yesterday, you will also be able to see that we looked at who is involved in demography, public health experts, statisticians, and so forth. We also looked at the history and the contribution of individuals in the art of demography. We looked at these definitions, which I have been able to discuss again. Now, there is a very key concept that we looked about yesterday, and today I want this lecture to be one that you will go back when you have understood the concept of sex composition. We talked about the indicators of the population composition, and we talked about age and sex as very vital indicators or very vital attributes, characteristics of a population that can help us determine a lot of things, including making laws, policy, including distribution of resources. So the age and sex composition is a very, very important indicator when you want to understand what your
Okebilo kabisa
population.
mobieli kili matera.
Kindly mute. Okay. Baptist, please kindly mute. Okay. Thank you. Yes. So then kindly mute, please. So, so oh my God. So when you're talking about age and sex composition, they help you determine a lot of issues, including your workforce. Using sex, you can be able to determine how many males and females are in your society, and then you will know how it impacts your workforce. In terms of if they are maternity leave, then if your population is predominantly reproductive age, and they are female, then you will know that at a certain point, your workload is going to be higher for men because a majority of the reproductive health aged females will be having a lot of maternity leave. And we were able to describe what a pyramid was, and we went into deep analysis into why the South Sudanese pyramid looks like this. And in developed worlds, you will see that this age group from about 70 is broader than this because many people survive to older ages than in many of our African societies. So, from just that concept of sex composition, today we want to dive into that issue. How do we analyze sex composition? And what I have termed here as the analysis of sex composition, I would pray that you pay very critical attention to this aspect because it is a very key. Now, what is sex composition? Here we're talking about the numerical measure. How do you measure sex composition? The numerical measure of sex composition are they are computed in three major ways. These are simple computations that give us a deep analysis of what our society is or what our sex composition is in terms of males and females. The first measure is the percentage of males in the population, what we call the masculinity proportion of a population. The second measure is the sex ratio or the masculinity ratio. Differentiate the word, we're talking about percentage of males in a population, which we refer to as masculinity proportion. Two, we're talking about the sex ratio or the masculinity ratio. And three, we're talking about the ratio of the excess or deficit of males to a population. We want to know whether there are excess males or there is a deficit of males in the population. And these are all numerical calculations. So how do you have these numerical measures? The mere excess or deficit of males is affected by the size of the population and is not therefore a very useful measure for making comparisons of the population group with another. Sometimes the size of the population may lead to excesses or deficit of of males. In bigger populations, you may realize that there are more males and more females. So it is a little hard for you to use this the third measure uh, as a very key measurement aspect if you're measuring the sex composition of your population. The three measures listed are all useful for inter-area or intergroup comparisons, meaning populations of different areas. It is these measures you can use them to do comparison of the sex composition in different areas, but also in different countries. For example, if we're talking about a comparison, we would want to look at a certain district or a certain sub-country, how the population sex ratio is vis-a-vis another region. Would want to look at the masculinity proportion vis-a-vis another region. Now, these measures are occasionally defined in terms of females. Occasionally meaning once in a while, they are defined in terms of females. Sometimes you can say there are 1,000 females to 100 males. However, conventionally or traditionally, they are defined in terms of males. Traditionally they are defined. These particular three measures traditionally are defined in terms of males. Now we want to look at masculinity proportion, which here is the first numerical measure of sex composition. This. So we want to understand what masculinity proportion is, but also how we can apply it in our population. Masculinity proportion, or the percentage of males. Let me just show this here so that you can see that. Or the percentage of male or complement the percentage of female is the measure of sex composition most often used in non-technical discussions. Non-technical, meaning there is no much technicality or expertise in discussing sex composition. So the formula of masculinity proportion is as simple as PM over PT times 10, where PM represents the number of males and PT the number of or the total population. So you will subject the number of males in your population, which we looked at in our earlier discussions. We were looking at the demography of South Sudan, and if we subjected this already calculated sex ratio, you would be able to get the number of males, and therefore, for purposes of trying to understand this, you could actually just take a look back at your population of males and then subject it to the total population of South Sudan and multiply by 100. You'll be able to understand what the masculinity proportion is. Now, when you calculate that, you'll be able to have different answers. What are the interpretation of the answers that you will get? Now 50, if you got 50% or 50 as a figure, it is the point of balance of the sexes, or it is the standard according to this measure, meaning that this is where the populations are equal. However, a higher note or a higher figure, more than 50, means or denotes that there is an excess of males, and a lower figure denotes an excess of females. The masculinity proportion of national populations varies over a rather narrow, usually falling just below 50, unless exceptional historical circumstances have prevailed. So this statement is roughly referring to you that majority of the figures for national populations, that the figures are always lower than 50, meaning that there is always an excess of females in the society, except historical circumstances have prevailed. For example, the historical circumstances in China, where they had population policies that favored the boy child, the one child policy, where they radically changed their sex ratio. So you need to understand so that you can be able to interpret the information very well. I hope that is clear at that point. The second measurement we had is called the sex ratio. The sex ratio is the principal measure of sex composition, especially used in technical studies. Remember, masculinity proportion is just used in non-technical discussions. However, when we discuss technically, we start to use the sex ratio. And that is why in that earlier slide that I showed you, if I can just take it back a little bit, you can be able to see in the demographics of South Sudan that the sex ratio is 97.6 males per 100 females. Now, when you note this, when we start to understand what sex ratio is, we shall be able to understand, or we shall be able to interpret this statement, and that will be key as we proceed here. So just to go back to this slide, how do they calculate the sex ratio? The sex ratio is usually defined as the number of males per 100 females, and its calculation is as this: population of males over the population of females times 100, where PM is representing the number of males and the number of females. Now, for those who are working in health facility basis, you can be able to get your OPD data or your inpatient information, and you subject the number of attendances into a sex ratio. So then you will be able to understand the health seeking behavior of your society. You will realize that there are more there are more female in many societies than males that utilize OPD or that come for outpatient services. Now, this is very critical in determining how I portray information. If you realize that there are more female coming for OPD or outpatient services, then it is only upon you to design projects that are looking at more health education to males. This is how critical sex ratio is. PF in that sense would mean that the number of females. So how do we interpret the answer? Now, 100 is the point of balance. Remember, in a masculinity proportion, 50 was the point of balance. However, in the sex ratio, 100 is the point of balance of the sexes. A sex ratio that is above 100 will denote an excess of males. However, a sex ratio that is below 100 will denote an excess of females. Accordingly, the greater the excess of males, the higher the sex ratio. The greater the excess of females, the lower the sex ratio. That is why, if you now decide and came up here after understanding this interpretation, you should be able to understand what this means. Sex ratio is that 97.6 males per 100 females. This only means that this only denotes that there are more females than males, because we have said that a figure that is below 100 only means that there are more females than males. And I hope that is critical and clear. But I also hope you understand why you would use sex ratio in your day-to-day work. For those who are even using diet, you can be, for those who are doing nutrition, you'll be able to understand why females or males are having more nutrition cases. So then you will be able to attribute it to your social dynamics. Possibly, girls are staying near kitchens and therefore they are having better feeding culture than boys who go further away to play and most times come back in the evenings and have not eaten. These are very key in analyzing. The third measure is the sex, is called the sex composition, the excess of males as a percentage of the total population. You're looking at uh, excess males over your total population, and you want to use it to understand what is the sex composition. In that case, the formula is as down, that you get your population of males and you subtract it by your population of females, then you subject it over the population of females and you multiply it by 100. Now, if you did that for the population details that we have just given you, you would be able to realize that the answers will either give you a positive note or a negative note. Now, the point of balance of this sex, according to this measure, is a 0. The first masculinity proportion, the point of balance is 50. Sex ratio is 100. However, the excess of males measurement, the balance is 0. The point of balance is 0. And therefore, a positive value will denote an excess of males. However, a negative value will denote that there are more females than males. Good. Now, it may be evident that the various measures of sex composition convey essentially the same information. Sometimes it is desired to convert the masculinity proportion into the sex ratio or the percentage excess of males, or the reverse in the absence of the basic data on the number of males. These conversions may be effected by use of the following formulas, the application of which is interested with figures for Venezuela. But in this case, this is just an example. However, we're trying to give you that in case you do not have the basic data on the number of males and females, it is still possible for you to do calculation of the masculinity proportion, sex ratio, and the deficit of males. How? Uh, Sorry, that is just a repetition of that slide, but there is more to that slide that we shall need to discuss. Okay. Just before we reach that, that slide. So this is supposed to be up. So if you look at this statement, it is trying to show you that there are certain formulas that you could use if you do not have the basic sex in terms of males or females. So if you do not have that basic, are you able to see this screen? I,
Yes.
This one, eh?
Yeah, yeah, I can see.
Okay. So this is off the the slide, but it is just I was just trying to show you a little bit of if you're unable to have basic data. For example, countries that have had uh, data collection issues, maybe due to basic wars and so forth, you will be able to realize that you can actually do these calculations using eh, these. So for example, in our earlier slide where we saw that South Sudan, the sex ratio is about 97.3 males per every 100 females, you can be able to subject that sex ratio over 1 plus sex ratio times 100 if you want to calculate your masculinity proportion. If you also want to calculate your sex ratio using your masculinity proportion, you will be able to subject your masculinity proportion over 1 minus masculinity proportion times 100. And if you want to understand your excess or deficit of males, you will subtract your masculinity proportion minus 1 minus the masculinity proportion. Just this formula that you're seeing here. And you can be able to see from that example of Venezuela, you'll be able to see that the interpretation does not change because masculinity proportion is measured at its balance of 50, whereas sex ratio is measured at its balance of 100, and the deficit of males is measured at its balance of 0. That is a very key concept that I wanted us to understand in
Yes,
terms
sir.
of trying to determine. Yes, yes, in terms of trying to
Uh,
determine. Yes, you have a
Yes,
question? Someone has a question?
yeah,
Please.
yeah. Can I have a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Now my question is on South Sudan population. You say that South Sudan population is 97 per 100 female. But how did you come to that one?
That one is the sex ratio. That is the South Sudanese sex ratio, which we calculate by dividing the population of males over the population of females times 100. This one. It is the sex ratio, where we are now able to subject that here, this demographics. Are you able to see this? Data source
Yeah.
is World Bank. The year is 2020, and the population size is 11.19 million. Now, there are here descriptions of the age groups. However, we're trying to if you had the interpretation of sex ratio, you would be able to understand what 97.6 males per 100 females means. Do I answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. Let's continue. Yes, it's okay.
Okay. Okay, fine. Yes, maybe someone else also has a question. You could interject at this time. It is okay. However, if no one else has, let me proceed.
You know, the other slide we did not understand. Here, I did not understand it well. Where you use the sex ratio to calculate the masculinity, or the masculinity ratio to calculate the sex ratio. So there is that one there which I really did not understand because I was not seeing the formula.
Eh, okay.
Trying.
Let me insert a new slide here, and then I type. Possibly you will be able to see what I was trying to say. So what I was trying to say is that in many cases for low developing countries, uh, most times because of the hardships in data collection, we may not be able to have data on the number of males and females in the country. However, if you do not have this data, you can still be able to calculate, the masculinity ratio. How do you do this? For example, we already now have the sex ratio of the country that is here. So, if you do not have that data, you will be able to say that sex ratio, let me just insert here the formula. Just a minute here. You'll be able to insert, and we shall use a formula and say here sex ratio divided by 1 minus sex ratio, and multiply these by 100, and we shall be able to get the masculinity proportion. Shall be able to get the masculinity proportion of the country. However, this, if you are able to get the masculinity proportion, it will then lead you to also being able to get the sex ratio. How will you do? You will subject the masculinity proportion. Let me also insert the formula. You'll be able to insert here let me just do this. The masculinity proportion over 1 minus the masculinity proportion times this times 100, and subsequently, subsequently, this one will be able to lead you into determining, if you want to determine there again, if you want to continue to determine your deficit of males, then you will be able to subject this masculinity proportion minus, in brackets, 1 minus masculinity proportion. This is what I was trying to describe earlier there. Do you now get it?
Yeah.
Yes. So when you don't have that data, you will still be able to use this, and they will still have the same interpretations. If we applied this even to the data that we have up there, we would be able to get this exact interpretation that was earlier there. So what is very key for you is to understand what are the measures of masculinity proportion, what are the measures of sex ratio, and what are the measures of the deficit of males. What are their balance points and what do they mean? So just to repeat, deficit of males, the balance is 0. If it is negative, then it is telling you about the excess of females. If it is positive, it's telling you about the excess of males. And the sex ratio, the balance is at 100. The one that is below 100 is telling you about the excesses of females, and the one above 100 is telling you about the excesses of males. Similarly, the balance for masculinity proportion is 50, and therefore figures that are above 50 are telling you about the excesses of males, and the figures that are below will tell you about the excesses of females. If there is no question on that regard, would want us to proceed to the demographic transition.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, I can.
Yes, I was trying to say the summary that you are putting forward, like when it is above 50 or below 100, is it somewhere summarized that you can share with us? Because sometimes somebody can just forget during exam. So it's just simple summary is better for quick understanding. Thank you.
The summary is actually here. For every measure, there is a summary. For example, the third measure, you can be able to see here, down here, that the point of balance of the sexes according to this measure or the standard is 0. A positive value denotes an excess of males, and a negative value denotes an excess of females. Every measure has a summary of its interpretation. So I think that will be easier for you to understand.
Okay.
Yes. So we want to go to a concept called demographic transition. And this is a very key concept that explains historical changes of population uh, uh, dynamics in very many countries or very many societies. The demographic transition is virtually the heartbeat of demographic discussions because it describes the first two or the major two uh, aspects of demography in terms of mortality and fertility. So the demographic transition is generally describing how mortality and fertility rates influence the transition of societies. Now, the theory explains the historical changes in vital rates from high to low mortality and fertility rates. Now, economic development leads to a decline in death rate, followed by a fall in birth rate to stabilize population growth. Just to take you back to this pyramid, uh, to this pyramid here, you will be able to see how birth and death play a very key role in the transition of societies. Now, the demographic transition is trying to show you how your population or how your society is transiting through from high fertility to uh, to lower fertility, but also from high death rates to lower death rates. How is that? How is that represented here? Now, when you see pyramids like this, you will be able to see that at the bottom of this pyramid, it is showing you that there are high birth rates, but also it is showing you that there are high death rates. That is why you're able to see that there is a power discrepancy. That if you looked at these other ages, that people are surviving more than at the lower base. If you're able to see this age group 0 to 4, you will be able to realize that there are high birth rates and there are also uh, high death rates. Let me just, for example, do for you a little comparison between this pyramid, this population pyramid of South Sudan. Let me just search here for you for the population pyramid uh, of China. You'll be able to understand the difference between those pyramids. Yes, it is loading. Uh-huh. It's why taking some time, but let me look for this. Now this is the population pyramid. Let me save and paste it in one of the slides. Just insert a new slide. Just a minute. Okay, as it is pasting, it has pasted right here. So if you can be able to see a very big difference in the shape of this pyramid vis-a-vis the South Sudanese pyramid. This is the 2020 population pyramid of China. Now, what is very key for you to understand about this difference? I'm trying to explain for you what the demographic transition is, how the shifts or how the interaction between births and deaths forms a transition. So if you look at these lower edges, you are able to see that in China, there are low birth rates, but also there are low death rates, because you're able to see they are at 3.0%, and the bottom of the pyramid is small. However, you can see there are more children that are surviving to the edges here in the middle. That is why in the middle, their population pyramid is bulging. It therefore means that their life expectancy is extremely higher than this, where you're seeing that there are high births and high death, but at the same time, the level of survival to later ages is very low. Now, when you continue to proceed from this population pyramid of China, you will be able to see that at this edge here, that they are having higher people around the age 30 to 34. You see, you can see that there are more males than females, extremely beyond this, from this age 30 to 34 to about the age 59 there. You can see that their male population is more than the female population. Now we explain some of the discrepancies that may occur as a result. But what is key for you to understand is the interplay between the rate of death and the rate of birth in terms of mortality and fertility. So you're able to further understand the challenge as a country in South Sudan, that this could be also as a result of people not seeking family planning services. That is why they have high birth rate. But it could also be because of the social construct that looks at having children as a means of protection, as a means of replacement. So therefore, people are not able to have or to utilize contraception or to use family planning methods. Thus, they are having high birth rate and high death rate. But it could also mean that because of the high death rate, people are then just producing because they are having the fear that at a later age their children will die. Why? Because as you see, from the ages 60, people are the number of people are relatively dropping drastically. It only simply means that we do not survive to the later ages of life, and therefore people are trying to produce here so that they can replace, because they very well know that because the society is succumbed by high death rate, they are then trying to tackle that by having high birth rates. That is majorly what the transition, what we call the demographic transition, is explaining. And like I said before, it is a core, it is a very core concept in understanding demography as a field. Okay, let me just drop back to that. So you can be able to see this explanation that economic development leads to decline in death rate, followed by a fall in birth rate to stabilize the population. So what happens is that when the economy is developed or when the society is developed, development in terms of access to healthcare, access to nutrition services, better healthcare, better nutrition, better feeding patterns, lower crime rates. This is economic development, that people are able to be in the money economy. Then this will lead to a decline in the death rate. Why? One, because people are accessing vaccination services, people are accessing healthcare, people are eating well, and therefore this will automatically lead to a fall in the birth rate. Why? Because people are able to survive to older ages, then they will realize that having more children is relatively a burden, because anyway, people can survive to the later ages. But also, it will mean that because they can access healthcare and healthcare information, there is possibility that they will start to adopt usage of family planning and modern contraceptives, which will help in planning families. But also, economic development may mean that people are going to institutions and they are studying. So, attainment of higher education levels would mean that people would not have a lot of children, because they are spending majority of their years in education. In societies where people are not going to school or where the education levels are lower, you will realize that their population is very high compared to those who are the so-called literate population, because they have access to information, and this will help in stabilizing the population growth. Population categorization based on age composition. Professor Sandberg identified different types based on age structure and population growth rate. He he just tried to emphasize that population growth rate is in about 4 stages, and in the first stage, or what we call stage one, is called the stationary population, where a moderate proportion of children and old persons, and there is slow growth. If you're explaining that in terms of demographic transition, in the stationary phase, you will see that there are higher death rates and high birth rates. That is why you're seeing that there is a very moderate proportion of children and a very moderate, in other words, a low number of children and a low old persons. Why? Because the children are dying, and therefore even people do not generally survive to older ages. So there is going to be very slow growth. Two is the regressive population. Here he's talking about a very high proportion of old persons and a declining number of births, in terms of that deaths are declining, and therefore people are surviving to higher ages of life, and thus because they are surviving, they are now giving birth to lesser people. And a majority of our African societies are yet about, some of them are yet about in that population stage. The third population stage is the progressive population, where there is a very high population of children and a high growth rate. Now, this is drastic of African populations, and from our pyramid, you can virtually be able to realize that we are about in this stage where we have a very high population of children. If I just took us back to our population dynamics, uh, if I just took us this proportion, you will be able to see that 50 about 53.8% of our population is uh, is a very functional population or a reproductive population, or they are at the stage that the population should be productive. But also at the same time, the population is has a very high number of young people. Now, this only helps us to explain what is being written in the uh, progressive stage of populations, which is here, that there is a high population of children. We have 43.9%, as I've just seen, and there's a high growth rate. That's why you're seeing about the age 15 to 49, there are a lot of people. And because they are at their production or at their productive stages of life, there is going to be a high growth rate. Now, the third age population stage is the aging population. We've seen countries like Italy about in this stage because there is relative proportion of age distribution and it's difficult to define it universally. However, you will be able to understand from those age groups that from that population structure that they relatively have some higher number of aging population. Just an example of China here. You see, it is relatively hard for you to determine universally the age group association, because you can be able to see that for them up to about 79%, they still have 1.1% of the population is at about 75. But if you look at South Sudan, when you're starting to talk about 75, we're at 0.6% of the population. So in this age population, in this aging population stage, it is very hard for you to determine or to universally describe their population distribution or the age distribution in that regard. What are the components of the population? As we discussed earlier on, population distribution. It is looking at how people are distributed across the continent, countries, urban versus rural. It is the environment influences population distribution. People may not be able to be densely populated in areas that are flood that may easily be affected by floods. Likewise, people may not be densely populated in areas that are mountainous. So the environment most times dictates, but also you may realize that urban populations may tend to be having higher populations because of the numerous opportunities involved in the urban areas. Another component is population processes. Three main factors that contribute to population change are birth, death, and migration. Births add to the population while deaths subtract from it. However, migration can add or can subtract. This is where we are talking about emigration and immigration. So because of migration, you may either be leaving a particular area, or people may be coming into a particular population area. So it affects the population changes in a particular area. That is what our population processes are discussing in there. The third component is population structure, which I think we've been able to discuss in our previous discussions. Population and the contemporary social issues is another concept that we would want to explain. Examples of the social issues and how they interact, or how demographic processes and structures interact with social issues, helps us determine how the society behaves in terms of project uptakes. Now, examples of these social issues influenced by the population include food security, we're talking about women's rights, we're talking about family structures, unemployment, aging, housing, urbanization, economic development, inflation, population, the ecosystem, literacy levels, individual freedom. We're looking about family planning uptake of healthcare services. So, what is this statement trying to mean? Uh, when population structures act, you'll be able to understand uh, certain social issues. For example, the process of migration. When people move into a country, and in terms of immigrating, that one of IM, when people come into a country, it will mean that the food consumption structures change. If the food that was in the country was for this kind of population, an influx of more populations will therefore affect the trend of food security in the country. That is how the population structure or the process can affect social issue regarding food security. Likewise, it can affect the employment system in the country, because maybe probably the type of population that is coming is one that is very literate, and therefore it is going to create and change the employment pattern in the society. It will also change the aging, housing, all these social issues that you're seeing in here will be affected. And this is affected in terms of what is the age or what is the birth rate of the society. If the birth rate is higher than the death rate, then you will be able to realize different social changes. For example, the housing issues will be changing, because then the population growth is higher, then housing will need to be increased to accommodate these populations. That is how population processes or the components of population uh, interact with contemporary social issues. Population change is influenced by three demographic variables, which we have just said. So the births add to the population, and deaths subtract from it, and that leads us to what we call the balancing equation, the population balancing equation, where we are able to determine total population. PT here is looking at the total population. What is the total population of the country will equal to the previous population, P naught. P naught is meaning the base population, meaning the previous population, plus the births in that place minus the deaths plus migration will give you this M is your net migration. And how do you calculate your net migration? To calculate net migration, you look at people who have come into the country vis-a-vis those who have left the country. Then you'll be able to get your net migration. Now, this is just trying to explain for you how the different population structures or the components of the population influence the different social issues. We earlier discussed the particular processes that influence population growth, and we said it is fertility, mortality, and migration. So here, when we're talking about fertility, we are roughly looking at the number of children born to a particular woman. If we subjected them to the previous or to the current fertility rates or the probability of fertility in that particular area. It helps us distinguish population increase, because when people when births occur in a society, then it is adding, or it is increasing the population, and it is used, the fertility rate is used to understand the birth rate. This is in terms of the number of babies that are born per thousand of a given population. So a measure of the impact of fertility on population can be done using the birth rate. If you wanted to understand what the birth rate of a particular society is, you would be able to subject them to this particular measure, and then you would be able to understand the fertility proportions in that particular society. Now, we have some of these components that are here, including mortality that can be measured using death rate, migration that can be measured through immigration, and so forth. I was thinking that I would want to make just a general discussion on these three main components of population structures, or the population, and then from tomorrow also, if you agree, we would look at the different theories that make demography an aspect. So I want to make a conclusion using these three aspects of population change. Now, when you're discussing issues of fertility, you must take fertility in its broader context. And in its broader context, it means that it has a very, very great influence, a very big interplay in determining the population size and in determining the changes in a population. However, fertility is subject to very many various factors, among which include the number of women in a particular population, but also the number of males in a particular population. Now, you very well understand that males do not get pregnant. However much they are able to impregnate their female counterparts, male personnel contribute less, or men contribute less in terms of increasing population. Why? Because one man could virtually impregnate a lot of women. So therefore, a population that has lesser men, has more men than women, we shall see it having a lower population growth rate. That's why if we took a measure of China, you realize that their sex ratio has more males than females. And if you subjected them to their growth rate today, you realize that their population growth rate is lower. However, for societies that are having more females than males, the proportion, or the population growth rate, is tending to be higher because of that reason that I have said. So in this context, how does fertility, or how does the understanding and measurement of fertility help you in the social context? You should be able to understand in fertility how many women. If you understand the sex composition of your population, you will be able to understand the fertility processes that will occur. If you're able to understand the birth rates of your society, then you will be able to know what the composition of the society is, and you'll be able to project how the society will fare. You'll be able to do a projection of its population. So having fertility will also still be subjected to sex and age ratios. So you will be able to understand that for us, if you looked at our population, because we have very many people in the reproductive age. You see, this age from 15 to 49, it is reproductive age, and that is why we shall be seeing that we have more births here, because a majority of our population is at its reproductive stage. I hope that explains for you fertility and its interaction with the society. Then, if you look at mortality in its entirety and death rates, uh, the rate of deaths in a society will be able to show for you how the society is faring in terms of social issues. Probably, if there are interventions, health interventions, for example, if there are immunization services, if there are maternal services, and the death rates of the community remain high, you will be able to understand what is the disease burden in your society, but also what is the health seeking behavior of individuals in your society. Now, age impacts more on mortality. Uh, just like fertility, the population age in your society determines the mortality rates. For societies that have higher infants and high number of elderly people, the possibility that the society will have risks of outbreaks is very high. Why? Because when you're talking about building a herd immunity, uh, children and elderly people have got a weaker immunity compared to the other ages of the productive age, and therefore a society that has a majority of its population in the productive age will have low risks of disease outbreaks than a society that has more younger people and old people. And death rate can be measured per 1,000. There are different measures for mortality, different measures for death rate, and different measures for, there are different measures for mortality, different measures for migration, and different measures for fertility. But in this concept here, we will not be able to cover them because they are as broad as the sex composition measures that we covered. Migration, we're looking at coming in and moving out of individuals. And like I said, there are different factors that may drive in people to a particular community, but there are also main reasons that may drive people out of a community. So it is always as a result of a play between push and pull factors. It is mostly a cost benefit analysis that moves people out and in of the society. Up to that far, I would want to stop there because I know we've gone, I think, 10 minutes past the time we started, and I feel that is quite enough that we have covered for today. So, if we have any questions, you could answer them as I conclude. But tomorrow, I am hoping that we can keep time so that I run through these theories as quick as possible and introduce us to another concept. Yes, thank you. I hand the mic back to you guys. If there is any question, please ask them, and then we can conclude. Yes, Edward. Edward, you can ask your question.
Yeah. Mine is about the population. You say the population increase like in a community due to influx of community. I mean, from maybe let me take at the concept of the national level. So, like, if people come more, like in South Sudan here, are we going to that population will be taken as a general population of the country, or the foreign population will be excluded to determine the population of the country? So I just need to differentiate that. And then in the like in the fertility rate, like in the hospital, because we have here, there are different uh, people coming from, let me say, foreigners, and taking all this fertility. Is it going to be also included as a general for the whole population of the country, or it is also categorized differently, so that the one of the country will be measured separately from those one who are coming from out? So I just need that differentiation. Thank you.
Okay. Another question? Another question, or I first respond to that one?
Yes,
Yes, please.
yes. I was talking like for our case now, like in South Sudan, the 28th census that they conduct. Which factor do they base on to estimate that like by 2020, 2020, let me say from 2020 to 2012, they will say now the population will increase by this. So based on, as like my colleague mentioned, there are foreigner in and there are also indigenous people of the land. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Now, in the aspect of measurement of populations, uh, these are projections. For example, what you're saying, Baptist, for you to do a projection, there is a method that is used for doing population projection. These are statistical packages that will be put into check, just like they were calculating, that helps you give an estimated population. And these are populations that are determined. For example, we would determine our birth and death rates, our population growth rate, by subjecting our birth and death and our births and deaths within a particular period to 100%. So then 3.2% because of the difference between births and deaths. For example, if you had 100, maybe we had 100 people being born, and out of 100 people, uh, we have three of them who have died. We would be able to subject that thing into our growth rate, and we would say that our growth rate is 3%. So then, if our growth rate is 3%, 5 years, and then say at the end of this particular year, we shall have this number of people estimated as a projection. There are statistical methods that are used for that projection, which we have not discussed here, but possibly I can go and include them in my next presentations so that we can have a feel of how population projections are done. And then on the issue of adding nationals, foreigners into population statistics. Now, collection of population information is very different. If you realize from our vital statistics of place of birth and and, uh, and nationality, these are measures that every data collection uh, entity picks. So what happens, for example, in an aspect in our less or developing countries, is that births and deaths in the health facilities are recorded. And therefore, for every birth that is in the community or in the health facility, there's a vital statistics that is taken on that case. And this data of 2008 that you're saying was a census where they asked for nationality. And therefore, in that particular uh, aspect, it is describing for you the entirety of the population. They are not saying these are foreign, these are non-foreign. These, because when we're talking about population, we are talking about the number of people that are staying in a particular place at a given time. We're not looking at whether it's a national or not at that particular time. Because, like I said, influence, when if you only counted your nationals and you planned for them only, you will realize that the so-called contemporary social issues would arise negatively. So it is a population of people who were at that point or at that part who were in South Sudan at that given time. And that is what population censuses cover. However, there are surveys that are done through the health system to say these are nationals, these are not nationals, through immigration services. I hope I have answered. Unfortunately, Baptist has left, but I hope I've answered.
Yeah, I think it's very clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think Ivan, I think, oh, Samuel was also in here. I think that is the conclusion for today. That's my conclusion for today. Unless there are any more questions, I would want to hand over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for these lectures, and I wish everyone a nice evening.
Yes, have a good night then.
Likewise to you.
Yes, yes, sir.
Thank you.